Sometimes in life you find yourself in places you technically shouldn't be, like in a middle school kickball game. So what do? You dominate and you take no prisoners. You know who gave me that advice? It was the E dominant 7 chord. So today we're going to learn the musical version of that encounter and talk a little bit about an introduction to borrowing chords from different keys or adding notes to a key you're already familiar with, okay? And the reason I picked the E7 chord is because a lot of times you'll see in the key of C an E7. And as we've talked about in previous videos, which if you don't know how to make chords from the major scale, I'll link you to a video because I think it's super, super important. I want to talk about where this E7 comes from in the key of C. So if we go over all the chords in the C major scale, we have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and C. So that third chord, that third note, C, D, E, is a minor chord, okay? So the usual 3 chord would be E minor. If you wanted to extend that, you could make it E minor 7. Now, a lot of times, like I said, in certain songs, maybe you'll see a progression like C to G to E7 to A minor. Something like that, right? So that E7 technically shouldn't be there. There is a G sharp note in that chord. But one of the reasons it works is what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about just adding one single note to the C major scale and kind of how that affects things. So the C major scale is just all the natural notes, no sharps or flats. We've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So if we add a G sharp, thus unlocking the E7 chord, it would look like this. C, D, E, F, G, G sharp, A, B, C. Now the reason that this works has a lot to do with the dominant nature of the E7 chord, which again we're going to apply to different keys later on. But basically, we've talked about dominant chords before and how they exist on the 5 chord. So in C, C, D, E, F, G, we have a G7 chord. And that's something that the blues uses a lot. A lot of different genres of music, pretty much all different genres of music have dominant 7 chords in them. But one of the most traditional ways to use a dominant 7 chord is to set up resolution on the 1 chord, the tonic, as it's called. So really, a fair amount of the time, whenever you see a dominant 7 chord, the very next chord is going to be the root chord of the scale. So what I mean by that is if you see a G dominant 7 chord, a lot of times it's going to be followed up by a C, or the 1 chord. So a 5 to a 1. Again, C being 1, D2, E3, F4, G5. That works in absolutely any key. So if you see like a D7, a lot of times it's going to be where D is the 5 of what key is that? G. So on and so forth. E7 would usually resolve on an A major chord in the key of A, right? But the reason it works in the key of C is because there's another chord in the key of C that has a lot of power, a lot of strength, a lot of pull in that key. And we're talking about the relative minor in the key of C, which is always on the 6th note, C, D, E, F, G, A, okay? So A minor is a very important chord in the key of C, which you probably already know. Most times in the key of C, there's going to be an A minor chord somewhere. And just like a G7 chord can resolve to a C chord, we can make a dominant chord for the A minor chord itself, and that is going to be where the E7 comes in, right? So when you have an E7 chord and go to A minor, right, there's a resolution there. It might be a slightly different type of resolution because we're resolving in minor, but it fits in the key of C, even though technically that G sharp note shouldn't be there. So some people call this borrowing chords, where we're borrowing an E7 chord from the key of A, where E is the 7th note, but we're choosing to resolve it on a a minor chord itself. So you can think of E7 as being a chord that technically doesn't belong in the key of C if we're just going straight up by like some of the music theory rules we've talked about, but it definitely fits pretty nicely, and that's all because of that A minor holding down the fort, right? So if we actually just take the concept of adding this G sharp note to the scale, it actually kind of unlocks and we can build other chords from that. So feel free to add that G sharp note to maybe other chords that you already know in the key of C major. And maybe one example of that is pretty cool is, let's take the 2 chord, D minor, right? If we were to add a G sharp to this chord, because we can make a D minor, the 2 chord, into a D minor 7. Now, the 5th note of this is going to be an A, okay? So if we made a D power chord, we'd have a D and an A. Now, if we wanted to replace that A with that G sharp, we can get a much darker sound off the 2 chord, right? So if we have maybe something in A minor, we can start adding that, and it definitely brings attention to the progression, but it's something that is really workable, and it's not the end of the world, and you can really find cool creative ways to do it. In fact, you can even make full new chords out of that D in its flat 5, like a D minor 7 flat 5. That's something that I really like to do, is add a minor 7 flat 5 quality to the 2 chord in any key, into the 1 chord, right? And a lot of these will, resolve still on the 1, like the parent chord of the key, in an interesting way. And maybe that's what you're looking for if you want to improve your own songwriting techniques, or just maybe add some chops to your playing, etc., etc. So basically the lesson here is that in any key, the 3 chord is a good candidate to maybe turn into a dominant 7 chord that'll still resolve either on the 1 or on the 6, the relative minor. So maybe one more example of that. Let's do like the key of F, okay? So in the key of F, F is our 1 chord, G minor is the 2 chord, and A minor is the 3 chord. So let's turn that A minor into a dominant 7. A7 to F, but it almost would make more sense to go from A7 to a D minor, which is F's relative minor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's D minor. So A7. So just a few tricks. Remember, the 3 chord usually is a minor chord or a minor 7 chord. If you want to kind of get crazy, explore outside the box, turn that into a dominant 7 chord. And by adding that, borrowing that from a different key, you're introducing a note into that scale that maybe you could work. Like, for example, taking the 2 chord and turning it from a minor 7 chord into a minor 7 flat 5 chord. So again, if some of this stuff is over your head, no problem. It took me a while to really kind of wrap my head around chord building from scales in general, but definitely be sure to check out that other video and hit me up if you have any questions on Instagram, Twitter, the comment section, or the website, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks a lot.